Madagascar's coup leader, Colonel Michael Randrianirina, has appointed a businessman, Herind Salama Rajao Nari Velo, as a prime minister, days after seizing power amid youth-led protests that ousted former President Andry Rajoelina. A gendarme was shot dead while on patrol in southern Ivory Coast ahead of Saturday's presidential election. President Alassane Ouattara, who is 83, is seeking a fourth term amid a ban on protests and outcry over the exclusion of top rivals Laurent Gbagbo and Tidjane Thiam from the race. 38 M23 rebel fighters have surrendered to the Congolese army in eastern DRC's North and South Kivu provinces. According to military officials, the move follows a Qatar-mediated agreement between the DRC and Rwanda-backed M23 to establish an oversight body for a potential permanent ceasefire. Aid agencies, including the World Food Programme, warn of an unprecedented hunger crisis in northern Nigeria, where 600,000 children face death from malnutrition amid escalating conflict and shrinking funds. The WFP, short of U.S. aid, has closed 150 clinics and slashed food distribution, putting millions at risk across the country. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy begins a 5-year prison term today at La Santé prison in Paris for conspiring to raise campaign funds from late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, making him the first French leader jailed since World War II. 15 international United Nations staff have been confined to the UN compound in Sana'a, Yemen, by Houthis since Saturday, while 5 local staffs have been released, according to UN spokesperson Stephane Dujarric, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has discussed the detentions with the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Oman, as 53 other UN staffs remain detained by the Houthis, some since 2021. Sanae Takaichi has become Japan's first female prime minister, leading the LDP amid political scandals and coalition challenges. She leads a minority government backed by the Nippon Ishin Party and faces the challenge of unifying her party while stabilizing the economy. Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha have traveled to Israel as envoys. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu amid Israeli accusations that Hamas is stalling on negotiation on hostage returns and as reports of Israeli attack continues. An attack at the vicinity of Khartoum International Airport. A drone attack hit the vicinity of Khartoum International Airport early Tuesday, 21st of October, just one day before Sudanese authorities planned to reopen the facility for domestic flights. Witnesses reported hearing multiple explosions and drones over central and southern Khartoum between 4 and 6 a.m. local time. The airport has been shut since April 2023, when fighting broke out between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, damaging vital infrastructure. Drone strikes have continued targeting military and civilian areas, including northern Omdurman, while the government pushes reconstruction and the return of officials to the capital. The conflict has left millions displaced, thousands dead, and sees the RSF still fighting to control the west, including El Fasher, the last major city in Darfur outside their control. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Charles Sinkala. He's an international relations expert, joins us live from Johannesburg. Thank you very much for joining us again. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, looking at this, what are the implications of these RSF forces and the fight with the Sudanese government. What's the situation in Sudan now?
Thank you very much for having me, and it has always been a pleasure for participating on this platform. Sudan has been engulfed by infighting, and mostly it is initiated by the outside forces. As one conversely understands the third law of conflict, that for every conflict there must be a third parties that are involved. Briefly, we can talk about the history of how Israel. Sudan was split into two, South Sudan and the usual Sudan, where it was made into two countries because of the infighting that has been going there, not only now, but for many years. And this has continued, although sometimes we can see that probably there is some peace, some agreements that has been signed, and they have come to some conclusions, but all these treaties that has been signed has built nothing but the continuous bloodshed and the killing of the innocent civilians in Sudan, especially South Sudan.
And how does this ongoing conflict impact the stability and humanitarian conditions there? Should international actors intervene more actively?
Yes, indeed. We need the international community, the regional organizations, and as well as the international communities that has to, come to find a lasting solution, especially where aid and as well as the de-escalation of military within that region. But some are accused, especially other international organizations such as the United Nations, for lending a deaf ear, to the cry and the killings of the people in Sudan. And this has exacerbated and made it very difficult for peace to be restored. As we are speaking, economically, the nation Sudan and South Sudan combined, they've been paralyzed as their economic activities has been shut down, as some areas are engulfed or they are perpetrated or controlled by the insurgents who are being funded heavily in terms of military and as well as financial support, which makes it very difficult for aid to reach the targeted civilians.
And do you think that as Sudan has like two different or to simultaneously have two different leaders, how is this seen in Africa? How is this news covered in Africa?
Well, instability in Sudan is instability in South Africa. Instability in Palestine is instability in Israel. As the world goes on like that, as we are intertwined in terms of the interconnectedness of human lives and activities, such incidences in Sudan as dearly affecting other economies, especially the neighboring region, and as well as the southern region, which we are fully dependent in terms of the exchange of bilateral and multilateral relationships between the countries, and as well as internationally for tourists and others, which has been affected. And I think the world needs to reconvene at the moment at the hands of the United Nations Security Council and the other wings that pretend that they're keeping or maintaining peace in the world, to relook at how these wars and the internal factions are exacerbated, and as well as the neighboring relations between Sudan and South Sudan and other regions, and how can they be a brother's keeper.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charles Sinkala, for sharing that very impactful message over here. And please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on. Madagascar's coup leader, Colonel Michael Randrianirina, has named businessman Herinsalama Rajaonarivelo as the country's new prime minister. Rajaonarivelo, who is a prominent figure in the nation's economic and financial sectors, replaces Zufin Zafi Sambo, who was appointed just 2 weeks ago by former President Andry Rajoelina. Randrianirina, who was sworn in as president after seizing power amidst youth-led protests that ousted Rajoelina, praised Rajonavrivelo's international connections and experience. The upheaval in Madagascar follows weeks of mass protests sparked by shortages in water and power, which has escalated into broader anti-government demonstrations demanding Rajolina's resignation. Rajolina, who has fled the country and is currently in exile, has condemned the army's takeover and refused to step down. The political crisis continues to unfold as the nation navigates the aftermath of the military's intervention and the rise of a new government. Now, for this discussion, we go back to Dr. Charles Sinkala. He's an international relations expert, joins us live from Johannesburg. Thank you very much, Doctor, for staying with us. Now, looking at this news coming in, do we take it as a bright news, good news? Who is this businessman? I'm sorry, I will not try to spell out or pronounce his name as I struggle with that, but who is this man and who is this individual? What does he bring to the office for Madagascar's?
Well, firstly, I'd like to condemn at all costs, the militia coup d'etat in Madagascar. I think the world now should not go to that resort. I think this gives you room in terms of other ways of getting into government. Politically, and the dynamics of geopolitics has dictated and told us that one can only be elected to office of the president. And I think the military stance in terms of taking over the elected government should be condemned at all cost. And this should not be allowed to continue to legitimize or undermine the elected government by the people and be nominated by the government, by the militia government. Be it as it may be, politics is a dirty game. Politics is where now investments are heavily invested into politicians for the sake of them having an upper hand in terms of business, whether within the nation, Madagascar, or outside. And many businessmen, they gamble, to support either a president or to support whoever who's got aspirations to be president in that nation. And of course, we can see how they are rewarded handsomely, by involving them into government and all senior government or positions for them to have upper hand in terms of that. Yes, I agree with you. Our brothers and sisters from Madagascar's names are quite interesting to pronounce. You need to think twice to pronounce the names, but he has been a very well-known businessman in Madagascar, as well as Seychelles. The Union Island has got a lot of businesses, as they call it, that whoever has the money, can call the piper. And it is, of course, it is very openly said that this businessman has actually, or had actually put so much investment in the coup d'etat, which just lasted and installed the new prime minister in Madagascar.
And yes, as you've mentioned, I'll try to pronounce his name here, but the previous Minister of Finance, Rufin Zafi Sambo, why do you think he was replaced? Was there anything in particular, a reason in particular for the replacement of this individual?
Yes, there's quite a lot of aspects while a senior government official can be replaced. And I think democracy in Africa and elsewhere, it is quite evolving. The more we distance ourselves in terms of the appointments, to make sure that they're regulated either by parliament or by the constitution, that gives people or those who are in higher positions to reprimand or to change their lower government officials without due regard to the law. It is unacceptable, as these appointments bring loyalty and the people do not perform to the best of their knowledge and ability in terms of even standing in between where there's corruption. That is perpetrated by government. But be it as it may, in the situation where the prime minister was replaced, yes, they could have had different views in terms of governance and as well as a break in terms of loyalty. As you can hear, many of the times in such political appointments, They are based not on qualifications, on how well somebody is doing or how well somebody is operating through his office, but the rise of loyalty. Loyalty is something that is very important that they look at. And if that loyalty is broken down, you can be replaced. As they call it, that is a prerogative of the president, you know, to either appoint or remove somebody from office without even giving any reason. Hence, I did mention from the background that the appointment and the removal of senior government officials must be institutionalized, you know, to give space in terms of whether a commission can be appointed to investigate and see if that person acted either against the law or against the provisions of his office.
And lastly, Dr. Charles Sinkala, as just we were discussing in our previous discussion, looking at Sudan, and now we see this, what are the potential risks and benefits of military-led transitions of power in response to popular protests? Dr. Sinkala. We now thank Dr. Charles Sinkala, and now we move on to our next news. The World Food Programme, known as WFP, and other international aid organizations are raising the alarm over an unprecedented hunger crisis in Nigeria. The situation is alarming, particularly in the north, where millions are fleeing from terrorist groups. Around 600,000 children are at risk of dying from malnutrition. While demand for emergency aid is surging, funding has been in sharp decline, with the World Food Programme recently closing over 150 clinics treating malnourished children. The United States, which once provided more than half of Nigeria's aid, has significantly cut its support, particularly after President Trump's dismantling of U.S. aid. The WFP is now facing a $115 million shortfall, threatening vital food and health programs, including those in refugee camps like Bama in Borno State, where food distribution has already been reduced. Aid workers warn the situation could worsen without immediate intervention. Now for this discussion, we welcome Desmond Majekodunmi. He's a political and environmental activist, joins us live from Lagos. Thank you very much, Desmond, for joining us again. Good to see you. Desmond, to what extent should these governments prioritize human aid in this region, in Nigeria? As you know, we see that they were heavily dependent on foreign aid, and now we see the ones that a plug has been pulled out, they are in this crisis. Is there something that the government over there could or needs to do so that this does not get worsened?
Yes, the government needs to do what it should have been doing a long time ago, and not having to rely on, foreign aid. Why should America have to aid a nation like Nigeria with a tremendous agricultural resource, vast stretches of good fertile land, a lot of water bodies that can irrigate, a fairly good rain system as well, and a lot of variety in terms of the environment. So different types of crops can be growing. So a country like Nigeria relying on American aid is really not the best at all. And now the ball is very much in the court of the Nigerian government. Of course, they need to get immediate succor and comfort to those people, especially the vulnerable children and the women. That needs to be done immediately. And there are some little measures already being taken, but it needs to be a lot more. However, on a much more broader scale and looking a little bit into the future, Nigeria should learn from what India has done with her agricultural sector. India has embarked long time ago on an agricultural revolution that totally turned the tables after the colonial intervention had been stopped. And India now was on her own. And she's done marvelously well, using not just all this heavy equipment, but using the light scale equipment, using organic systems, using very effective agricultural systems that has made India a net exporter of a lot of agricultural products. So Nigeria should learn from the lesson of India, who I'm sure is not relying on American aid for her people to be able to eat.
Yes, indeed. That's a very good point that you bring out, Desmond. And how is, or is there any infrastructure that is in place in Nigeria where the communities can respond to this funding shortfall and they can enhance the humanitarian efforts in northern Nigeria?
Yes, that's a very important question. There is infrastructure in place, because even the aid that was coming from the US aid system, it went through local infrastructures. And that's how the food and the aid was able to get to the people. So it just means that the government, who actually, earning a bit more now than they used to a couple of years ago, because they've cut down the subsidy on fuel, on petrol subsidy. So money is back into the system that had been used and abused on the subsidy. So the funds are there, and the basic infrastructure is there. There are some humanitarian organizations who are very keen to ensure that people are not left to starve, especially the vulnerable ones. So there is good hope for the people, and the silver lining on what looked like a dark cloud was that this country, Nigeria, that has all the potential, will now be able to live up to her people's expectations and do the necessary to ensure that her people are not in hunger, and ensure that they are making a good resource economic gain from the wonderful agricultural potential that is there.
Yes, and Desmond, building on our first or second question's answer, lastly, in what ways can India collaborate with Nigeria or African nations to address these shared issues like food insecurity?
Yes, this is so key, because, when you have a winning team, which is what India is in the agricultural sector, there's no doubt about that. A country that was able to pull herself away from, what was a very oppressive colonialism that had gone on, where I believe there was even a time when the Indians weren't even allowed to manufacture their own cotton, even though the cotton was grown there. The oppression was terrible. And the way it was overcome, Nigeria and other African nations should learn from the textbook of India, of how she pulled herself out of this situation, how she even went into legal backward integration with her industries. You can't develop your industry unless you're sourcing your local material from our soil and all this. There's a lot that African nations, and Nigeria particularly as the giant of Africa, could learn from India. And again, to re-emphasize the small scale agriculture machinery, the mechanization of agriculture to a great extent in India is a lot of handheld tiles and small, tilling machines and small scale machinery, which doesn't impact so negatively on our soils, which are more delicate. The tropical soil is more delicate than soils in other terrains. It's not as deep, the topsoil level. So you need to, treat it more gently. And this is where we have a lot that could be gained from working in cooperation with India, who manufactures, I would imagine, probably 99% of the equipment that she uses in her agricultural sector.
Wow, I had no idea. Thank you very much, Desmond, for sharing that insight and teaching me about that. Thank you. Now we move on to our next news. Protests erupted in Nigeria's capital city, Abuja, as supporters of Nnamdi Kanu demanded his release. Kanu is the leader of the outlawed indigenous people of Biafra, and he faces terrorism charges. He has been in detention since 2021. Demonstrations spread across major roads, disrupting traffic and leaving commuters stranded. Some clashes also turned violent, with gunshots reported in certain areas. Meanwhile, police has responded by firing tear gas, deploying water cannons, and using electric barriers to disperse the crowds. Dozens of protesters, including members of Kanu's legal team and family, were arrested. Kanu denies all charges and is expected to begin his defense on Thursday after the court dismissed his no-case submission. His case has long been a flashpoint in the southeast, where the Igbo ethnic group alleges marginalization by the Nigerian government. Ivory Coast prepares for presidential election on October 25th amid tensions in Abidjan and other urban centers. President Alassane Ouattara, who is 83 years of age, seeks a fourth term despite criticism and opposition boycotts, with two leading candidates disqualified. Protests by young voters have been tear gassed and security forces deployed nationwide, while the opposition calls for voter registry audits and daily demonstrations. Infrastructure projects and economic growth under Ouattara have improved living standards, but cost of living and inequality remain high, and disinformation has fueled public mistrust. Let's listen into what some of the locals have said.
Oh, l'atmosphère est plutôt calme, plutôt calme. C'est peut-être vrai que dans un village, on a vu quelques petits remous, mais ces remous sont vite calmés.
Non, vraiment, il y a eu des violences, mais ce n'est pas le souhait de quelqu'un, la violence. Donc, on ne pense pas que ça se reproduise, les violences, que Dieu nous éloigne de ça, et que le pays roule, et que le pays soit béni.
Bon, effectivement, les gens ont peur de venir visiter à cause des élections qui se passent. Il faut que ça passe d'abord pour que les gens ont peur, au fait, de quitter très loin, venir visiter. Voilà, c'est ça au fait. Que présentement là, à partir du mois passé, jusqu'à ce mois, pas de visiteurs. On ne reçoit pas du tout.
Pour cette élection, la jeunesse souhaiterait qu'on va aux élections en paix. Que tout le monde soit libre de parler ce qu'il pense. Parce que la Côte d'Ivoire, c'est pour nous tous.
And that's a wrap on Africa Brief. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.